Live streaming is on.
Okay, you guys, welcome to Science Today. We're going to do it's genetics and selective breeding. So it's just a continuation of kind of what we've been doing. So what I want to do, there's a couple readings I want to do together, and then I'm going to kind of let you do the rest on your own. But I do want to show you. Okay, so the first one is about genetically modified foods safe to eat. And genetic modification, if you look over here, it says the process of altering the genes of an organism to change its traits. Okay, so it says, do you hate going to the doctor for flu shots? What if you could eat banana instead? Through a process called genetic modification, scientists are creating food that contains human vaccines as well as extra vitamins and minerals. It says genetic modification allows scientists to change an organism's traits by transferring genes from one organism to another. It says by creating genetically modified organisms, and it says GMOs, scientists can increase positive traits and decrease negative ones. For example, scientists have genetically modified some soybean crops to resist certain chemicals so that farmers can spray and kill weeds without harming the soybean plants. Okay. And sometimes you go to the supermarket and you're paying attention. Some foods are labeled non-GMO, which means they haven't been genetically modified. Because some people are a little particular about what they eat. They don't want, any chemicals in their food. So I think in certain states, manufacturers are required to put on the label whether that food has been genetically modified or not. And that's really what the GMO label is. Some you can see that say GMO on it, and some will say non-GMO. Okay. So this one just asks, what genetic modification do you think each of the plant crops below has undergone? Write the correct letter next to the crop. So the first one is cotton, and you're going to have, do you think cotton is pest resistant, enhanced fragrance, slower rate of fruit softening, or bad starch eliminated? Well, cotton would be nice if it had an enhanced fragrance, but that's probably not the proper one. We see a flower on there. So cotton is going to be pest resistant. That way you can grow as much cotton as you want without fear of having kind of a pest eat the crop and make your harvest not as big. So cotton, number one, would be pest resistant. Tomatoes. There's nothing worse than eating a soft tomato. So number two, they've genetically modified tomatoes. So there's a slower rate of fruit softening. So that would be C. Potatoes. So potatoes have a lot of starch in them. So you're just going to look at that and say, potatoes is going to be bad starch eliminated, which would be D. And carnations, that's where you have the fragrance. So carnations have enhanced fragrance, which means they're going to smell better. And all those are examples of genetic modification. And B says, currently most genetically modified organisms are plants. Why do you think there are fewer genetically modified animals? That one you guys just have to think on your own, but people probably don't like, it's a little more complicated with animals, and you're kind of, affecting the core species when if you genetically modified something. Sometimes there's crosses in the wilderness, but scientists don't like, crossing a bear with a tiger or, a cat with a dog. That would really kind of, affect kind of the core kind of species there. All right. Now this one, it says, are genetically modified foods safe to eat? Genetic modification is different from other methods of changing an organism's traits, such as selective breeding. In selective breeding, people allow animals or plants with only certain traits to reproduce. But this process can take a long time and have inconsistent results. In genetic modification, scientists control the organism's traits by directly adding genes in a laboratory. This process is fast and specific, and it produces combinations that would never occur in nature. For example, to create a tomato plant that can withstand frost, scientists add the gene of a flounder that lives in the Atlantic Ocean. There's no way this would ever happen naturally. A fish couldn't possibly mate with a plant. So when they put that gene of the flounder, flounders live in really cold water. Obviously, the Atlantic Ocean can get really cold, especially like in the winter. So what that's doing, it's helping that tomato plant withstand cold weather. So if we get a cold weather, frost doesn't necessarily kill that tomato plant, which it would on its own. So we're adding that gene of the flounder plant into the tomato plant, and they do that in a laboratory. Then that tomato plant can kind of withstand colder weather. So this says name 2 ways that genetic modification is the same as selective breeding, and 2 ways it's different. Okay, 2 ways it's the same. It's controlled by people or scientists, and we change organisms' traits. And they gave an example. We're kind of changing the traits of the tomato plant when we're putting the gene from the flounder into the plant. So it's controlled by people or scientists, and we change organism traits. And the ways they are different, genetic modification and selective breeding. Genetic modification is fast, and it says it right up here, and selective breeding is slow. And another way they're different is genetic modification produces trait combinations that would never happen naturally. I mean, they have to happen in a laboratory. It talked about that. There's no way a flounder could mate with a plant. Okay, so 2 ways are similar, controlled by people, and they change organisms' traits. Genetic modification is fast, selective breeding is slow, and then genetic modification produces trait combinations that would never happen with selective breeding. Okay, so go down here. Write either genetic modification, selective breeding, and name the process used in each situation below. A scientist uses a gene from bacteria to create a new strain of a corn plant. That's genetic modification. Farmers replant seeds from tomato plants to produce very large tomatoes. That's selective breeding. And a jellyfish gene is inserted in a zebrafish, nucleus that creates fish that glows. And that would be the genetic modification. Okay, so you guys, here just a couple more short readings like that where you just have to kind of answer them out. Here's another one. Here's another one. They're all really short and similar. And this is another one. There are, I think, 8 questions. All the answers are right here. So if you're not sure, you can certainly go and check the answers. And then I want to read this handout. This is selective breeding. It says Charles Darwin, a British naturalist, lived in the 19th century, is best known for his book, The Origin of the Species. In it, Darwin established the idea of evolution that is widely accepted today. The idea proposed that all species alive have resulted from an adaptation to their surroundings. Natural selection, the process by which traits are handed down over time, is probably the most famous principle for the book. The process of artificial selection, however, is perhaps not well known and remains one of the most important concepts of understanding of human, plant, and animal behavior. Today, artificial selection is called selective breeding. So selective breeding involves breeding animals or plants for a specifically typical desirable trait. By doing so, the desired genes of the plants or animals will be passed on as offspring. Dog breeding is one of the most popular examples of artificial selection. You need only to tune into a dog show to see the power of selective breeding. Crossbreeds, for example, are dogs from parents from 2 different breeds. Mixed breeds were born from parents of more than two breeds, and pure breeds are born from a single recognizable breed. All three varieties are featured in most dog shows. So that would be, labs are only breeded with labs. So you get a female lab and a male lab, and that would be selective breeding, as opposed to having like a lab mate with like a kind of a pit bull, for example, and that would be like a mixed breed. That's why sometimes people pay so much money for pure breeds. But what happens is through the process, we talked about mutations. Sometimes that happens when you're constantly trying to mix the same breed. It happens in horses a lot too. Then you start to get those mutations. So, but that's just kind of be selective breeding. It's when they're from basically a lab with a lab or a pit bull with a pit bull, and that's when you get the pure breed. Okay. And this talks about genetic and selective breeding, this article here. And you can just read this. And then at the end, there's some questions. And once again, at the end of this, I think there's 10, excuse me. And the answers are all right here. So go ahead and, just read the rest of those and try to answer them the best you can. And then if you get stuck, you can certainly go down here and, look at the answers if you're having a hard time. Okay. Have a wonderful day. I'm going to go ahead and start. We're going to do a reading today at 11 o'clock. You guys have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.